Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going back in time a little bit to a pretty crazy moment in U.S. politics.
Yeah.
Kind of those times where even the stuff we thought was untouchable, like those government agencies that have been around forever, well, they suddenly get caught up in all the upheaval. Well, that's exactly what went down when President Trump decided to shake things up big time with just one executive order.
Yeah, and you know what's really fascinating about this whole thing is that it wasn't just some, simple budget cuts or like a little reorganization. No, we're talking about like a direct hit to how these institutions worked at their very core. And let me tell you, this whole move really brought out some seriously deep differences in how people saw America's role, out there on the world stage.
Yeah, for sure. I'm ready to dive in. Let's unpack this a little. So his main target was the Voice of America. Most people know it as VOA. But I think for some of us who might not be totally up to speed on all this, can you give us a quick, what is VOA all about? What do they do?
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, VOA is like this international broadcaster, and it's funded by the U.S. government. They've been around for ages, really, with this mission to share how Americans see things with the rest of the world. You can kind of think of it as a way to build connections, and help people across different countries understand each other better.
Okay, that makes sense. But it sounds like President Trump saw things a little differently,
Yeah.
right? He came out and accused VOA of spreading what he called radical and divisive propaganda, saying it wasn't really about those American values.
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting because you've got someone like Kari Lake, who was a senior advisor over at the USAGM. That's the agency that oversees VOA. And she comes out publicly and just slams the whole agency as rotten a burden. And she even said it was not salvageable.
Wow, that is intense,
Yeah.
especially coming from someone inside the organization, right? You
Yeah.
can't help but wonder, what's really going on here?
Mhm.
Was it really all about saving money and making things more efficient, or was there something else going on? Was there some kind of hidden agenda at play?
Well, you've got to keep in mind that this whole thing wasn't only about VOA. This executive order was taking aim at 6 other government agencies, too. They were all fleeted for elimination, and when you actually look at the list, it's pretty striking.
So what else was on the chopping block besides VOA?
Well, you had places like the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, which is a pretty well-respected think tank, right?
Right.
Then there was the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They do a lot to support those cultural institutions. And even the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness was targeted.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. It wasn't just about taking down one broadcaster. It sounds like there's a bigger picture here, right?
You got it. These agencies, even though they were all doing different things, had one big thing in common. They were all involved in areas like knowledge education, social development, and supporting minority groups. And that brings up a huge question for us to really think about, what does this tell us about what the administration was prioritizing back then? What were they really focused on?
Yeah, that's a great point. It almost seems like they were saying, hey, we don't need these experts. We don't need libraries, and we definitely don't need to focus on things like social programs.
Yeah.
It's a pretty strong statement to make, don't you think?
Definitely. It's a bold move, and it makes you stop and think, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, it really makes you think about what they were saying officially. The administration's reason was that these agencies weren't really serving American interests. They said that VOA in particular was pushing views that didn't fit with their vision, their idea of what America should be.
Yeah, and I can imagine that didn't go over well with everyone. It sounds like a lot of people saw this as a pretty blatant power grab, trying to shut down anyone who wasn't totally on board with the Trump agenda.
And that's exactly what made this whole executive order so controversial. It wasn't just about money or making the government smaller. It was about who had the power, who controlled the story, and whose idea of American values would actually win out in the end.
It's almost like something you'd see on a reality TV show, right? Like firing the producer who shows you in a bad light. You know what I mean?
It is a good analogy, but we do have to be careful not to oversimplify things. This wasn't just some random event. It was all happening against the backdrop of Trump constantly going after the deep state and what he called the biased media. So this whole move against VOA and the other agencies wasn't an isolated thing. It was part of a bigger pattern we saw during his time as president, challenging the way things had always been done, taking a really aggressive stance, and putting his own vision first, even if it meant shaking everything up.
And what happened after all this? Did those agencies actually get shut down?
Well, the fallout from this executive order was huge, to say the least. Some agencies had their budgets cut or got restructured, but they didn't completely disappear. There was a lot of pushback from different groups, legal challenges were filed, and there was a ton of debate about what this all meant for the future.
Yeah.
What would the long-term impact be?
So it wasn't a total victory for the administration, but they definitely made some waves.
Oh, absolutely. It was a huge fight, not just about the role of government, but about the whole idea of expertise and objective information in a world that was becoming more and more divided. And this is where it gets really relevant for everyone listening, because this story isn't just about one president or one agency. It's about something much bigger. It's about the power of information and how it shapes how we see the world around us.
So how does something that happened back then connect to our lives today? Why should someone who's not a political expert or a media critic care about this?
Because we're all constantly bombarded with messages, from everywhere, trying to influence what we think, what we believe, even what we do. And in this kind of environment, it's more important than ever to be critical thinkers, to question the information we're given, and to look for different points of view.
It's true. It's so easy to just accept whatever we see on social media or hear on the news without really stopping to think about it critically.
Exactly. Take a second to think about where you get your news and information from. Are those sources reliable? Do they present a balanced view, or are they trying to push a specific agenda? And even more importantly, what are your own values? What do you believe in? And how can you make sure those values are reflected in the information you choose to consume and the decisions you make?
So it sounds like we have to be our own fact checkers and editors in a way.
In a sense, yes, Trump's efforts to reshape VOA and those other agencies really highlighted something important. Information is never truly neutral. It's always shaped by the people who create it, the platforms that share it, and the reasons behind it.
So what does this all mean for us? What's the big takeaway here? Yeah, it sounds like we can't just sit back and let the information wash over us. We've got to be more involved, sorting things out, analyzing, and really thinking about what we're seeing and hearing.
Exactly. And that's why this whole deep dive into Trump's executive order is so relevant. Even now, it's a powerful reminder that the fight over information is real and it's happening everywhere all the time.
This whole thing with VOA and those other agencies, it wasn't just about politicians playing games. It was a sign of something much bigger changing in our society, a shift where the idea of truth and trust are being eroded.
And that brings us to a really crucial question for all of us. What part do we want to play in shaping the future of information? Do we want to just be passive,
Right.
letting algorithms and hidden agendas decide what we see and believe?
Or do we want to be more active, informed citizens who think critically, seek out different perspectives, and hold those in power accountable? It feels like we're at a turning point.
The choice is ours, but one thing is for sure, the stakes are incredibly high and doing nothing has huge consequences. We all have a responsibility to be thoughtful about the information we consume.
Well, that about wraps it up for our deep dive today. We hope this episode has given you some things to think about and maybe even inspired you to be a little more proactive in navigating this crazy world of information.
Remember, knowledge is power, but it's only powerful if we use it wisely.
Until next time, keep exploring. Keep asking those tough questions and keep diving deep with us.